the night my son-in-law raised his hand. His mother smiled and my daughter stared at the floor. I understood something with terrifying clarity. If I reacted with emotion, we would lose everything. My name is Margaret Hale. I am 58 years old and I live just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, in a quiet neighborhood where people wave politely and pretend nothing dark ever happens behind closed doors. For nearly 3 decades, my career revolved around crisis management. I was the woman companies called when reputations were on fire, when scandals threatened to destroy everything they had built. My job was never to panic. My job was to wait, observe, and strike at exactly the right moment. I never imagined I would need those skills to save my own child. My daughter Lena was 33 that spring, intelligent, sharp-tongued in the best way, a city planner who believed streets and parks could change how people treated one another. She had married Ethan Brooks 2 years earlier. On paper, he looked flawless, real estate investor, well-connected, generous donor at charity. His mother Diane liked to remind everyone of that. The dinner was meant to be simple. A Sunday evening, a small remembrance for my late husband Thomas. Lena insisted on hosting. She said she wanted to cook his favorite meal, as if recreating that routine might keep grief from spreading further through our lives. When I arrived, the table was perfectly set. Candles, folded napkins, soft music playing in the background. Everything looked rehearsed. Lena hugged me tightly, but her body was stiff. She wore long sleeves despite the warm Carolina air. Her smile appeared on cue, then vanished the moment she turned away. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm glad you're here." Ethan greeted me with charm polished to a mirror shine. Diane watched from across the room, eyes sharp, lips already curled with judgment. Dinner began politely. Conversation floated around safe subjects: traffic, development projects, property values. Diane spoke the most. She always did. Every sentence ended with a lesson about discipline, standards, or how women today lacked resilience. Halfway through the meal, Lena reached for the serving dish. Her hand trembled. A spoon clinketed against porcelain just loud enough to break the rhythm of the table. Ethan's fork stopped midair. He looked at her slowly, deliberately, like a man deciding how far he could go. "Are you nervous?" he asked calmly. "Or just careless, as usual?" Lena opened her mouth, but the words never came. He stood, not abruptly, not angrily. He reached across the table and squeezed her wrist hard enough that I saw her flinch. Then he leaned close and whispered something only she could hear. Diane laughed. "That's how women learn," she said lightly, lifting her wineglass. "Embarrassment works better than kindness." The room went silent. Lena's eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. They were not asking for comfort. They were asking for permission. Permission to survive. I did not shout. I did not stand. I did not reach for my phone. I watched. I memorized every movement, every word, every witness, because this was not the moment to act. This was the moment to prepare. And before that night was over, every single one of them would underestimate me, and that would be their first and most expensive mistake. Before Ethan entered her life, my daughter was not a woman who apologized for existing. Lena grew up in a house where voices were never raised to win an argument. Her father, Thomas, believed disagreement was not a threat, but an invitation to understand. On Sunday mornings he brewed coffee strong enough to wake the entire block, then sat at the kitchen table reading the paper while Lena challenged every opinion he had. He never shut her down. He listened. He smiled. He taught her that her voice mattered. That lesson shaped everything she became. As a child, Lena rearranged furniture in her bedroom because she believed space affected mood. At 13, she wrote a letter to the city council complaining about broken sidewalks near her school. At 21, she stood in front of a classroom and argued that neighborhoods could heal people if designed with dignity. She did not seek approval. She expected respect. Thomas used to say she walked like she knew where she was going, even when she didn't. When she lost her father suddenly to a stroke, something essential cracked. Grief did not weaken her intelligence, but it softened her boundaries. She became more willing to compromise, more willing to let others decide what was best for her. That was when Ethan appeared. They met at a regional planning forum in Raleigh. She told me he asked questions that sounded thoughtful. He praised her work. He said he admired ambitious women. When she talked about her projects, he nodded intensely as if absorbing every word. Later I would understand that attention was not admiration. It was assessment. At first, he encouraged her independence. He told her she inspired him. He sent flowers to her office. He remembered details. He made her feel seen, at a moment when grief had made her invisible to herself. Then the suggestions began. "You work too hard," he would say, not as criticism, but concern. "Those colleagues don't really appreciate you. Maybe that outfit sends the wrong message in my circles." Each sentence landed softly, each one shaved away a fraction of who she was. By the time I noticed something was wrong, Lena had already begun editing herself. She spoke more carefully. She paused before answering questions. She laughed less freely. When I asked how work was going, her answers grew shorter, rehearsed. I told myself she was adjusting to marriage. I told myself grief explained the change. I told myself that being a protective mother meant trusting my adult daughter to make her own choices. I was wrong. What I didn't understand then was that control does not announce itself as a threat. It arrives as concern. It disguises itself as love. It waits until the person you trust most becomes the authority over how you think, speak, and move. By the time Ethan suggested that Lena step back from certain projects because they conflicted with his social obligations, she believed she was choosing harmony. By the time Diane began commenting on Lena's posture, her tone, her usefulness as a wife, Lena believed endurance was maturity. And by the time I saw my daughter lower her eyes at the dinner table, I understood something I had missed for far too long. The woman sitting in front of me was still my daughter, but she had been shrinking herself to survive, and no one shrinks without being pushed. Control does not begin with shouting. It does not begin with bruises. It begins quietly, almost politely, the way fog creeps in without warning, until you can no longer see where you started. After the wedding, Lena stopped calling me on her drive home from work. Those calls had once been our ritual. 10 minutes of laughter, complaints, small victories. When I asked why, she said evenings were busy now. Ethan preferred quiet after work. He needed peace. Peace was his word for silence. At first, it sounded reasonable. Marriage required compromise, didn't it? 2 lives merging, 2 schedules adjusting. I told myself this was normal. I told myself not to interfere. Then I noticed how she dressed when she visited me. Softer colors, longer sleeves, no bold jewelry. When I asked about the change, she shrugged and smiled. Ethan liked things more understated. It was better for his image. Image. That word came up often. He spoke about image when he asked her not to attend certain networking events without him. He spoke about image when he suggested she decline a leadership role because it might attract the wrong attention. He spoke about image when he reminded her that powerful men preferred wives who knew when to step back. Every limitation came wrapped as advice. Every restriction was framed as protection. Diane reinforced it constantly. She would lean in close, voice low and intimate, and say things like, "A successful marriage means knowing your place," or, "Men need to feel respected, especially men who provide." Lena began repeating those phrases without realizing it. I heard Diane's voice coming out of my daughter's mouth, softened, rationalized, made reasonable. When I pushed gently, asked if she was happy, Lena hesitated before answering. "Not long, just long enough." "Of course I am, Mom. I'm just tired." But tired does not hollow out a person's eyes. Tired does not erase their laughter. The real shift came when Lena stopped disagreeing. She used to argue for sport. Now when Ethan contradicted her, she nodded. When Diane criticized her cooking, she apologized. When decisions were made about their home, their schedule, their future, Lena deferred. One night I asked her directly if she felt safe. She looked startled, then amused, then defensive, all in the space of a breath. "Why would you ask that? Ethan would never hurt me." She said it quickly, like a rehearsed line. I recognized it then, that tone. I had heard it before, in conference rooms filled with executives protecting toxic leaders, in crisis calls where employees defended the very people destroying them. It was the voice of someone who had learned that resistance carried consequences. The most dangerous thing Ethan ever did was convince Lena that every conflict was her fault. If he was angry, she had pushed him. If he withdrew, she had disappointed him. If Diane criticized her, it was because she needed to improve. Responsibility became a burden she carried alone. By the time she stopped sharing her fears with me, she believed fear itself was a failure. She believed love required endurance. She believed marriage meant shrinking. And I, the woman trained to read patterns and anticipate collapse, realized too late that my daughter was living inside a crisis. No one could see something was wrong, and it was no longer subtle. The first time Ethan crossed the line, it did not happen in anger. That was what terrified me most when Lena finally told me. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. No shouting, no argument that would have sounded alarming if overheard, just a small mistake. A comment Lena made during a lunch with friends of Ethan's family. She corrected a detail about a zoning project, gently, professionally, the way she had done 100 times before. Ethan smiled in public. He always did. In the car afterward, he did not raise his voice. He placed his hand on her knee and squeezed slowly, deliberately, until her breath caught. He told her she had embarrassed him. He told her she needed to learn when to be quiet. He told her that smart women often ruined good marriages by forgetting their role. That squeeze left a bruise the shape of his thumb. When Lena showed it to Diane later that week, trembling, unsure whether she was asking for help or permission to leave, Diane did not look surprised. Instead, she nodded. "That is how men establish order," she said calmly. "You should be grateful he is correcting you early. My generation learned these lessons without complaining." She told Lena to wear longer skirts, to stop correcting him in public, to stop challenging authority. She showed her how to apply concealer so the mark would not show. Yellow first, then foundation, then powder. She spoke as if teaching a recipe. That was the moment I realized this was not a family problem. It was a system. After that, the incidents escalated in careful increments. A shove disguised as urgency, a door slammed too close, a hand gripping her arm when she tried to walk away. Always followed by remorse, gifts, apologies, promises. Ethan cried convincingly. He spoke about stress, about pressure, about how much he loved her. Diane reinforced the cycle. She framed endurance as loyalty, pain as growth, silence as wisdom. Lena hid the marks well. Long sleeves, strategic makeup, excuses about clumsiness. She stopped coming to my house unannounced. She stopped changing clothes in front of me. She stopped letting me see her fully. I noticed the way she flinched when voices rose, the way she scanned rooms before speaking, the way she asked permission for things she once decided without hesitation. One afternoon I caught her staring at her phone, tears rolling silently down her face. When I asked what was wrong, she said nothing. When I pressed, she whispered, "I just need to be better." That sentence broke something in me. No woman decides she needs to be smaller unless someone has convinced her that her existence is a problem. The night of the dinner, when Ethan tightened his grip on her wrist, and Diane laughed, I saw the entire structure clearly for the first time. The roles, the script, the applause for cruelty. They believed I was another woman who would freeze, excuse, normalize. They were wrong, because while Lena had learned to survive by shrinking, I had spent my life dismantling systems that thrived on silence. And as I sat at that table watching my daughter lower her eyes, I made a promise I did not speak aloud. This would be the last time anyone taught my child that pain was love. They just didn't know yet how much they were about to lose for believing otherwise. The moment I decided to act, Ethan and Diane sensed it. People like them always do. I did not announce my intentions. I did not threaten. I did not confront. I began quietly, the same way I had handled corporate disasters for years. I documented everything: dates, times, witnesses, small inconsistencies that revealed larger truths. I spoke to Lena gently, carefully, making sure every step was hers, not mine. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then the counterattack began. It started with whispers. A colleague of Lena stopped returning her calls. A woman she had worked with for years suddenly avoided her at a professional mixer. A project she had been leading was reassigned without explanation. The justification was vague. Concerns about focus, image, stability. That word again, image. A week later, Lena was called into her supervisor's office. She was told it might be best if she took some time away until her personal situation was resolved. They used the phrase mutual agreement as if pressure could be softened by polite language. She came home pale, apologizing to me for being a burden. I recognized the strategy immediately. They were isolating her. Then they came for me. An anonymous complaint was filed questioning my ethics. Old cases were suddenly revisited. Online posts appeared, carefully worded, suggesting I was a manipulative mother exploiting my daughter for attention and leverage. Someone leaked the idea that I was exaggerating events, that Lena was unstable, that Ethan was a respected man being targeted unfairly. None of it was overtly false. That was the brilliance of it. They twisted truths just enough to poison perception. Dion's social circle went to work. Charity boards, private luncheons, phone calls made behind closed doors. The narrative spread quietly but efficiently. Lena was difficult, emotional, influenced. I was overbearing, vindictive, obsessed with control. I had seen this tactic before. Destroy credibility, so facts no longer matter. Lena felt it immediately. She stopped checking her email. She stopped answering messages. She asked me one night if maybe we should slow down, wait, give Ethan another chance. That was when I knew how close we were to losing her again. Because fear does not just live in bruises, it lives in exhaustion. She was tired of defending herself, tired of being watched, tired of explaining, tired of fighting people who smiled while cutting her down. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and held her hands, noticing how cold they were. If you go back, I said calmly, this will stop for a while. She looked up at me, eyes glassy, desperate for reassurance, and then I continued, it will get worse because they will know they can break you. She didn't argue, she just cried. That night, I lay awake realizing something sobering. Ethan and Diane were not trying to win legally. They were trying to outlast us, to strip Lena of her confidence, to make me question my own strength, to turn truth into noise until silence felt safer. What they did not understand was that I had spent my career surviving wars of attrition, and I never entered one without preparing my final move. Because when people attack you where it hurts most, they reveal exactly what they are afraid of losing, and I was about to find out just how deep their fear ran. The message arrived at 2:14 a.m., no name, no subject line, just a single sentence. You need to look at what was hidden before Ethan learned how to hide himself. Attached was a secure link and a passcode that expired in 24 hours. I did not wake Lena immediately. I sat alone at my desk, the house silent around me, my pulse steady in the way it only gets when instinct takes over. This was not a threat. It was an invitation. The files opened one by one. Audio recordings first. Dion's voice, unmistakable.com. Instructional. Speaking to someone she called family. She talked about managing situations, about shaping narratives, about how some women needed pressure to understand their limits. She laughed softly while explaining how to break resistance without leaving marks. Then came emails, old ones, years old, messages Diane had sent to private contacts discussing Lena long before the wedding. She called her strong-minded, inconvenient, a liability if not corrected early. My hands went cold, but the real twist waited in the final folder. A scanned police report dated 11 years earlier. The death of Ethan's father ruled an accidental fall down the stairs in their previous home outside Asheville. Case closed quickly. No charges, no follow-up, except the report included handwritten notes in the margin from a junior investigator. Notes that had never made it into the official conclusion. Injury pattern inconsistent with a single fall. Multiple points of impact. Witness statements retracted after family intervention. The attachments continued medical records, photographs, a timeline that made my stomach drop. Ethan had grown up in a house where violence was normalized, where silence was enforced, where power was absolute. His mother had not only survived abuse, she had perfected it. The final audio file confirmed what the document suggested. Diane speaking late at night, irritated, dismissive. He wanted to leave, she said. Men always think they can walk away once they're no longer useful. I taught him otherwise. There was a pause, a breath. Ethan doesn't remember everything. He doesn't need to. He learned what matters. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair, the weight of it pressing into my chest. This was no longer just about my daughter's marriage. This was about a lineage of control. A woman who had shaped her son into an extension of her will. A system that didn't break people by accident. It trained them. The sender revealed themselves the next morning. A woman named Rachel, who had once worked in Dion's household years ago. She had been dismissed quietly after asking too many questions. She told me she had kept copies. She told me she had waited until someone was finally ready to listen. I saw what she did to that girl, Rachel wrote, and I couldn't stay silent anymore. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something shift, not relief, clarity, because now I understood what we were facing. Not an abusive man who lost control, but a legacy designed to destroy anyone who threatened it. And now that we had proof, real proof, the rules of the game were about to change. They believed they were untouchable. They were wrong. They had left a trail, and I was done walking around it. Next, I would walk straight through it. Lena asked to see Ethan the morning after I told her everything. Not out of hope, not out of fear, out of resolve. I need to look at him, she said quietly, and hear my own voice again. We met in a visitation room that smelled like disinfectant and old paper. The kind of place where power disappears quickly. Ethan walked in thinner than I remembered. his confidence stripped down to something brittle. When he saw Lena, his face softened with relief. He mistook her presence for forgiveness. He was wrong. She did not sit immediately. She stood across from him, hands steady, posture straight. The woman she had once been returning to her body. "I didn't come here to negotiate," she said. "I came to tell you the truth." Ethan began to speak, but she raised her hand. He stopped. That alone told me everything. He had never learned to listen to her until he no longer had a choice. "You taught me to doubt my instincts," she continued. "You convinced me that love meant obedience. You let your mother erase me, piece by piece. And when I resisted, you punished me for it." He shook his head, eyes wet. He blamed stress. He blamed his upbringing. He blamed love that was too intense to control. Lena did not flinch. "I know what your mother did," she said. "To your father, to you, to me." The room went still. "She didn't just raise you," Lena continued. "She programmed you. And instead of breaking the cycle, you chose to become it." Ethan's shoulders collapsed. For a moment, I saw the child beneath the cruelty, the boy who had learned that survival meant compliance. But empathy did not change responsibility. "I am filing for divorce," Lena said. "I am reclaiming my name, my work, my life, and you will never have access to me again." He reached across the table instinctively. The guard intervened. "I loved you," Ethan whispered. "No," Lena replied calmly. "You needed control. Love does not require permission to exist." She stood. He begged. He cried. He promised change. But promises without accountability are just another form of manipulation. When Lena turned and walked out, something broke in the room. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. The spell was gone. Within 48 hours, the recordings and documents were in the hands of investigators. Charges escalated. Restraining orders were enforced. Ethan violated one, in a moment of panic, and was arrested again. The carefully curated image collapsed under the weight of evidence. Diane tried to intervene, tried to bargain, tried to intimidate. It didn't work because systems built on silence collapse when confronted with truth spoken clearly. Lena did not look back. And for the first time since this began, I saw her breathe freely. The cage had never been locked. It had only been believed. And belief, once broken, never regains its power. 5 years have passed since that dinner in Charlotte. The night's silence became a weapon, and then a shield. Lena lives downtown now in a small apartment filled with light. Nothing extravagant. No heavy furniture. No locked doors. The windows stay open whenever the weather allows, as if air itself is part of her healing. She works for a regional planning nonprofit designing public spaces for communities that have been overlooked for too long. The work is quieter than her old job, less prestigious on paper, but it gives her something she never had before: peace. She laughs again, not carefully, not quietly, fully. She runs in the mornings. She cooks because she wants to, not because someone expects it. She chooses her clothes without asking an invisible jury for approval. These details may seem small, but anyone who has lived under control knows they are victories. She is seeing someone slowly on her terms, a man who asks questions and listens to the answers, a man who does not confuse love with possession. When she told me that the first time he raised his voice in frustration, he stopped immediately and apologized without being asked, I knew she was safe, not because he was perfect, but because he was aware. As for me, I wrote this story because I promised myself I would not let it disappear into polite silence. Not for Lena, not for the women who reached out afterward, saying they recognized themselves in her hesitation, in her exhaustion, in her doubt. Not for the mothers who wrote to say they were afraid to ask the questions that mattered most. Ethan is no longer part of our lives. His mother is no longer the shadow behind him. The system that protected them did not fall all at once, but it cracked enough for light to enter. Sometimes justice is not loud. Sometimes it simply removes the power to harm again. What survived was not vengeance. What survived was truth, and truth has a way of rearranging everything it touches. Before I end, I want to leave you with 5 lessons this story taught us. First, abuse rarely starts with violence. It starts with control dressed as concern. Second, silence can be fear, but it can also be strategy when used wisely. Third, power protects abusers only until truth is documented and spoken clearly. Fourth, leaving may cost you comfort, reputation, and stability, but staying may cost you your life. Fifth, healing does not mean forgetting. It means choosing yourself again and again. If this story resonated with you, you are not alone. What lesson did you take from this story? And what city are you watching from? If you believe stories like this matter, like, share, and comment below. Your voice might be the one that helps someone else say no more.